Let's bring in our Rice News analyst, Dr. Amadi, to actually have a conversation about all of these plans, really, especially from the federal government, beyond, the successive plan for the economic sustainability plan. But let's talk about EndSARS. We do know that in the coming days, youth all across the country are planning for a commemorative celebration, and we've seen calls by different parts of the government, including the vice president, saying do not go ahead with it. But what is the general impression about the plan, actually, to compensate victims of police brutality as well as prosecute the perpetrators? Is it a new day, you would say, for the rule of law in Nigeria?
Well, the first reaction is, why now? I mean, this is a year now. The state governors, through this same neck, advised that they should start the panels. Many of the panels have finished their proceedings for quite a long time. And so now, at the eve of the anniversary, they come with this, you can call it lame duck. Yeah, if you say compensation, by the way, the NEC is not a body that has authority to make laws. So everything that NEC decides is for peer review and for adoption, voluntary adoption by states. It has no constitutional or legal authorization, unlike the president that has Section 5 powers to make binding commitments, and of course, National Assembly that makes law. So if any of the governors really want to, bring back rule of law and impunity, which is what started the protests, they would have used those proceedings in their judicial panel of inquiry that have legal structure to begin prosecution. And by the way, you don't need the IG of police to do that, because the criminal code that define most of these offenses, we're talking about brutality, killing, all those things, murder, for example, are criminal offenses that the State Attorney General has the capacity and authority to prosecute. It doesn't have to get any fiat. It doesn't have to get any approval from the IG to prosecute a police officer. Now, internal disciplinary measures can be worked out in addition to that. So the first issue is there strong commitment? Does this statement show good faith that these governors will go back home and domesticate through legal processes this compensation? Because you have to, either through the state assemblies, prosecutions for these offenses, or is it just to head off what seems like a new crisis, okay? Now, so basically, yeah, I would say yes, it would be wonderful to compensate and prosecute. Part of the Nigerian crisis today, including the terrorism, is a sense of lawlessness. And that's high because executive officials, whether the state or the federal government, get away with murder, literally. So until you bring back that level of rule-based, it's also good for economic development. So people want to see that if some persons act extrajudicially and kill or wound or maim or brutalize persons, they are accounted for. Take, for example, Enugu State. When the killing happened in MNA, I went to court. I wrote to the governor and said, look, constitute a judicial panel. The governor refused. I went to court. I got a judgment 2 weeks ago, saying that the government should establish a judicial panel. So the question is, will they implement? So this sounds more like political. But
Dr. Amadi, beyond the implementation, if the governor or the government of Enugu State would actually implement that, we've actually seen, a situation where the crime scenes have actually been, tampered on. Yeah. So there's not enough evidence that you can actually get from there. Almost a year after that happened. But let's look at the fact that the National Economic Council are the one who are calling, right? This is a high fear when it comes to decision-making
executive power, basically.
Well, at the end of the day, they have the backing of the executive, like it or not, even if it's not enshrined in the Constitution. But for the fact that the National Economic Council is the one who's calling for the compensation of victims and the prosecution of those who carry out this dastardly act, do you think that somewhere along the line we might see some justice for victims of police brutality in Nigeria coming from this body?
We can. It's very easy for them. For example, NEC, each of them binds itself to say in the next 1-2 weeks, the Attorney Generals of our states will roll out a legal framework, for example, and say these are the level of compensation. This is the evidence that will entitle to compensation. Second, in the case of prosecution of public officials, they can, even if they don't want to prosecute, they can report to the Attorney General of the Federation to prosecute those police officers or security persons who have tangible evidence. Let not the best carry out the good. We can't get all the evidence, but some cases are clear. So deal with that. Even at this point, the federal government can leverage on this NEC resolution, because look at the point. Most of those panels have wound up. They have reports. They have made case for what should be done. Now the next stage is implementation. So yes, it's good that NEC says so. It has a political message. It's a powerful organization. It's a peer review structure for governance, and it helps with coordination from federal to state. It's an important economic management framework. But the point I'm making is that it has no, everything it says has to be delivered, implemented by somebody, either a federal agency or state governors.
So we don't
themselves.
see a committee come up with all sorts of resolutions and eventually it just starts collecting dots.
Yep.
Well, let's move on right now and talk about the fact that this new national development plan, it's actually proposing about a 5% growth for 4 years, you know, talking about the GDP and the creation of about 21 million jobs and also raise about 35 million people out of poverty. Would you know that the administration, as it stands right now under President Muhammadu Buhari, there's that target of lifting over 100 million people out of poverty. But how realistic, really, are these expectations if you look at the time frame between now and 2025?
This plan is supposed to be a follow-up to the growth, the economic recovery and
sustainability
growth
plan. Yeah.
Now, that plan failed. If you look at indicators, you know, whether in terms of power, ramping up of power capacity, they didn't meet the indicators. So that tells us more prudence and caution that these plans require much more alignment in policy. Now look at the plan. 5% GDP growth is possible in the next 2 years. In the next 2 years, if the vaccine impact of vaccine on COVID, as we expected, gets better, government is projected, World Bank, maybe 4% increase, and especially countries like Nigeria that are behind, your ramping up is higher, okay? So that can happen for 1 or 2 years, but to keep it at 5 years continuous requires stronger fiscal and monetary policies and strong economic plan. Now the issue of lifting, okay, job creation. Now the problem is that we talk about infrastructure creating jobs without thinking about, do we think about which infrastructure, how will the job be created? So you should start first looking at the Nigerian competitive advantage, resource base, structure, and say, where do we create this job? If you look at China, if you look at what has happened in the Shenzhen region, for example, it's structured in a way you create an innovative ecosystem where you attract intentionally certain kinds of companies. And you also map it to the way economic production has globalized change. We're going to what we call fragmentation. So people are manufacturing bits and pieces. In Taiwan, they take over the semiconductor. So they create job. And those companies are embedded in the community and they help them with the right kind of skills. The universities, research centers, and are tied to industry. So the work of coordination to create this job from infrastructure or from industrial policy is the one that we don't have the policy framework for. And so again, NEC needs a bureaucracy that has the capacity to develop and match to states. This is how you can, for example, if you're tourism, you can't just create job by saying you want to create job. You have to say
framework has
what capabilities and skills can you aggregate and create back forward integration with business and public sector. What level of public goods are you producing that will now create the job? Many people have given tax waivers to multinationals and they come to your place with a desk office, but the parts they use is in Taiwan. The part they use is in Ireland or in Israel.
At the detriment of the Nigerian economy.
So
the local GDP, manufacturer.
Because you don't have the fabrication, the factories, the skill set to create the workforce they need.
Absolutely. So it goes beyond coming up with these policies. We have to look inwards and see what we're capable of doing and ensure that our local manufacturers have, the capacity. Dr. Amadi, our Rice News analyst, thank you so much for joining us tonight on the program.